Good morning, everyone. I am your host, Jason Miles, and this is Revolution Podcast, audio-only edition. Happy Friday, everyone. When this drops, if you're a patron, happy Thursday if you're a patron. But for the vast majority of everyone else that is listening to this show, happy Friday. As I am recording this in a very different location than where I usually record this, I'm listening to my father, very happy that the recall results for the governor of the great state of California that I live in is looking like Gavin Newsom will stay in, and we won't have to get Larry Elder as governor. And I'm okay with that because I don't like Larry Elder. My co-host, Pascal Robert, not a fan of Larry Elder. I somehow stumbled upon watching Larry Elder talk to, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Tucker Carlson, but it was another Fox News pundit. And they were talking, I don't know if it was an old clip or not. It could have been an old clip. But they were talking about Trayvon Martin, and Larry Elder was just so upset about Trayvon Martin and the crime-ridden suburb that he lived in, that he felt that George Zimmerman was justified in shooting Trayvon Martin because, you know, there have been some car break-ins, and car break-ins mean unarmed children have to die. I've never thought about a car break-in that way. I will say this. I've been very angry. Someone broke into my car once, and someone stole some shit out of my car, and I was maybe about 30 feet away, and I saw him, and I jumped in my car, and I did try to run him over. And I'm glad I didn't, because once the reality of what I was trying to do hit me, it's like, I shouldn't be that mad. He literally stole my underwear and socks bag. So it was like the disrespect that pissed me off. Like, I'm not going to get into it, but because I don't have Larry Elder politics. But anyway, it looks like he will not be the governor because it looks like Gavin Newsom, and I don't want to jinx it. That's what I'm saying. As I'm saying this now. But this show wasn't really about the recall. We talked about it for a little bit. But this show was about building organizational power on the left. And with a little bit of subtext in there of not just building power and building strong organizations, because the foundation world, the nonprofit industrial complex, if you are a fan of this show, I've been talking about for some time because I've worked in it. And I've had a few, I shouldn't say several, a good amount of people that have worked in that world as well, always with the unhoused, because that was the environment that I worked in, talking about the pitfalls of that world, the trappings of that world, and the issues with that world, but from a squad's eye view, from the ground level. My critique has always been from the worker's perspective, because I think that's one that isn't really heard when we talk about these things. We always talk about the founders, and then we talk about the fundraising. So this show is more about not just so much fundraising, but what do these organizations do, and how do we use these organizations to put the power back in the people's hands. And then, you know, you often hear a term in this left sphere about holding politicians' feet to some proverbial fire. And mean tweets don't necessarily hold feet to the fire. So how do these organizations put pressure on and not just back pat when it's all over, right? Like there's a campaign to, a great example to me would be Minnesota, right? A lot happened during the George Floyd uprisings of 2020. And if you guys remember, the city council was like, all right, fine, you guys win. And it felt like there was a victory lap being won, and not much has changed. They were supposed to eliminate the police department in a whole, and they have not. So, but we, again, talked about, and we weren't calling organizations out of who's real and who's what. It was just more about our guests, Liz and Jose, talking about what their organizations do and how they build real political power, how they mobilize people. And of course, we got into a conversation about fundraising. If you're not a patron, man, this is one of those shows where you should sign up just to hear the bonus after hours discussion. Because as you will hear at the end of this, Pascal leaves you with a cliffhanger. So if you want to watch these shows in real time, the best place to do it is YouTube. YouTube.com/This Is Revolution Podcast. And if you want to become a patron, wherever you're listening to the show, there are links in the description to Patreon. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. That wonderful music is my cue. And I am Howard. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of This Revolution Podcast. And as you can see, my background is a little different. It's a little spicy. So I just want you guys to know none of this is mine. This is my father's party tray, as he likes to call it. Just kidding. But it is. So the background for me will be changing for the next few weeks. May not be the same for a while. I see someone in the chat asked, is that Swan's music? No, that is my music, and I'll take that as a compliment. Without any further ado, let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog, Mr. Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles, live from the Sugar Shack. The Sugar Shack.
I'm still in California. I'm still in the Bay Area, another part of the Bay Area, across the bridge. Our show tonight, I'm very excited for our show tonight. We've been trying to do this for a while. I actually contacted this organization some time ago and finally was able to make the dates work. So originally we were going to start doing this on the weekend, but no better time than the present, being that it's the last day of the California recall election. How do you feel about that, Pascal?
Hey, man. How do you feel about Larry Elder possibly being your governor?
Larry Elder reminds me of Dudley's dad on Different Strokes. Remember Dudley's dad on Different Strokes? Well, before we bring in our guests, let's play the clip that we have to explain what we're talking about, which is building organizational power for the left.
The Black Panther Party headed by the end of '68. At that point, you're in prison. You've been convicted. Seal is under indictment. Cleaver is out of the country. What did you think? What did you think was going to happen?
Well, again, that I wanted to emphasize the community development aspect of the party. We were, at the time that we were just creating we were planning our creation of a community school. We were having busing programs to prisons where we would pick up community people and take them to the various penal institutions. I felt that we should turn away from the arms because too much had been made of them, and I thought that the arms had served their purpose as far as being a catalyst to gain enthusiasm of the community.
For political strategies such as an inside-outside plan of action to be effective, the left needs strong movements with organizational strength that has an ability to influence politicians to govern at the behest of the people rather than being courtiers for major corporations and special interest groups. How do we build this on a local level? How do we keep these institutions from being corrupted and becoming foundations that don't challenge power and simply protect partisan party interests? We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Oh yeah, I was very well aware of that. Was one of the reasons that we didn't want the we were.
I'm sorry, if you could just rephrase.
All right. During the period of '68, '69, the federal government had declared all-out war on the party, and they were breaking into headquarters across the chapters, breaking into chapter headquarters across the country, and filming weapons and saying that, look, they have guns. It was never mentioned that the guns were legal weapons. They were doing everything to make the community afraid of the party. And of course, you can't organize when people are afraid of you. So I was inclined to try to develop more local politics, to run local members for various offices, and develop our 10-point program, which was a housing, food, and health program.
Can't hear you. Lost the volume.
What do you think about that, Pascal?
I think it shows a very interesting evolution in the tactics and methodology of the Black Panther Party in a very crucial time.
Well, that's what I was trying to do. Without any further ado, let's bring in our guests. First, coming all the way live from Oakland, California. Now, I don't want to get this wrong. I believe she's the co-founder of Oakland Rising, Liz Suk. Am I right?
I am not the co-founder. I am the new executive director for Oakland Rising.
Okay, that's still a good position.
It is. I just got into the position about 8 months ago, but I've been with the org for about 3 years now. But Oakland Rising as a collaborative has been around for about 15 years, and Oakland Rising Action as a committee, also our sister organization, has been around for the same amount of time.
And also coming from the Bay Area as well, representing the Ella Baker Center, Mr. Jose Bernal. There he is. Can you hear us, Jose?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Cool.
You want to give us a quick rundown on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Jose, and I'm the organizing director at the Ella Baker Center.
The second one is because I was afraid you were going to come at us with no picture. I kept seeing the background, no pictures. Like, oh shit. So I'm glad we got that worked out. And what goes on at the Ella Baker Center for those that don't know, since this show goes out nationally?
Yeah, so we're named after Ella Baker herself, and in the spirit of Ella Baker and in her organizing model, we build leaders in community, right? We build strong communities, and our main focus is to shift resources away from prisons, policing, and other very harmful systems, and we reinvest those resources into community. So that's, in a nutshell, what we do. We're an advocacy organization.
And were you guys, I was asking Liz real quick about the recall, since today for us in California is the last day to vote to either keep Gavin Newsom in office or recall him, with most likely a Republican, and Larry Elder is leading the race right now. Kind of an old school, odious man who I've known for some time. I even remember him when he was the judge on that reality show. Do you guys remember that?
You took it back to the old school, Jason.
Moral Court, dude. He was on Moral Court. It was Larry Elder. He was morally bankrupt then and isn't much better now.
Is he originally from California?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think he moved here.
I found out at some point he has a law degree, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, how do you become the judge of Moral Court, Pascal? You don't just pick at random.
Yeah. I think he went to the University of Michigan Law School, if I'm not mistaken. But
Moral Court isn't gonna take some poo butt law degree.
Okay, someone in our chat says he's from Watts originally.
Word? Would that explain why he hates did you hear him go off about Trayvon Martin?
I did. I think that he demonstrates that the fallacy of believing that someone who comes from, scrappy background means that once you get status, you're going to have progressive politics. I actually have found it very common in my personal experience to find a lot of guys who some would call them strivers, who come from the scrappy, poor and working class to go to college and become professionals, have some of the most reactionary right-wing politics that I've seen. I'm not saying that is guaranteed, but I've seen that happen a couple of times.
I mean, he's pretty horrible. So real quick about the recall, what is your guys' feelings if Gavin Newsom is to be replaced with a Larry Elder, since the messaging has been Dianne Feinstein most likely isn't going to make it through this term, and she would be replaced by a horrible Republican candidate like a Stephen Miller?
Do you want to take that, Jose?
For the work you guys do, how would that hinder?
And then just to be really clear for Jose on this question would be expounding as his individual self and not as his C3 organization.
Like how would this affect the work that you do? Possibly affect the work that you do even more?
Yeah. So thank you for that disclaimer. I do have to say this is my opinion, and that's just because Ella Baker Center is a 501c3, and so we can't take any positions in recalls, and I have to be careful, right? So I'm speaking as an individual right now. But let me say that, first of all, I am not a fan of Gavin Newsom or his neoliberal policies. As someone who, grew up, really disenfranchised, in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. I don't know if folks here are familiar with it, but I remember, being in line for a shelter bed with my family, and I also am formerly incarcerated, and so I've gone through the system, and my life's work has been really pushing back on the harmful narrative of criminalizing folks, of creating the system that doesn't really create opportunities for people, but rather just, this carceral, harmful system. And so Newsom, I think he's kind of like a mixed bag when it comes to that. And in some cases, he's been okay. And in other cases, he just hasn't. But the alternative with the recall, if we put somebody in there like Larry Elder, I mean, it's not just getting rid of Newsom. It's undoing all of those hard-earned, fought victories that community members, folks on the inside, folks on the outside, decades of work that we've gotten, to get those victories that we've tried to achieve. And so it really, I look at it as not just an attack on Newsom. I think he's just a person, right? But the alternative, I think, is more dangerous. So, I'm a little worried about it, to be honest.
And let me ask you, because you said Newsom is a mixed bag, and again, this question goes to Liz and Jose. What would you say that Newsom did right or better than you thought? What kind of surprised you during the Newsom era?
I don't think that I have been surprised by anything that Newsom has done. He has, for a very long time, positioned himself within the Democratic Party and in a full trajectory to where he is, right? And he has not done anything more or less outside of the line of what he's done since, as a board of supervisor in San Francisco and then as the mayor. He has always sided with neoliberal politics, particularly around corporations. We are in the situation we are in, not just because of Newsom, but much of our gentrification policies and the process of gentrification in the city of San Francisco is a result of a lot of favors that he did for corporations. The reason why Twitter and all of the big tech corporations can live the way they do in the city, and the direct impact that has had on communities directly next to the Twitter building and to all of the others. I can't think of all of them right now, but that sit right next to the Tenderloin. And then the result of
Uber, Twitter.
Yeah,
what else?
Exactly.
Market. Yeah.
Yeah, all of those corporations that sit right there, and the impact that they've had. They have brought in a considerable amount of, tax money, and has made San Francisco quite wealthy, but that has not trickled down into us seeing the services that that are needed. The disparity between the rich and the poor keeps widening. So I can't say that he's done anything different, because he still does the same thing as governor. He still favors corporations, he just puts a really nice face on it, right? And when you're standing next to Trump, you look good. You stand next to Larry Elders, you look like any choice that you're making around climate change looks good, but it's not very far off from anything that he or the Democratic Party has stood for.
What do you guys say when someone throws back at you, well, there's jobs they're creating when they bring these companies like Twitter and Square and Uber into San Francisco? And I can't remember what other major tech companies are in the city. Salesforce, has that massive Tower of Babel-esque monstrosity in downtown. What do you say to that charge that they're actually employing people? I'm just playing devil's advocate. Don't get mad at me like I feel that way.
You saw my laser eyes coming through the screen. That actually that they did bring jobs, but they weren't jobs for San Franciscans. They weren't for the Bay Area. It wasn't for the folks that that lived here. It's not for Black and brown people. It's not for poor people. It is the reason why we have so much gentrification. We have so many tech bros that have moved here from so many places. And then, when the pandemic came, many of them left because they're like, oh, I don't want to live here. I could just be where I want to be and do what I want to do in a different place. And so, the city has constantly changed. I went to the city the first time in a very long time last night. I was like, wow, this place is empty. It was really nice to move through the city with that kind of ease. But it does tell you that who the makeup of the city is it is not the same city that I went to school with, at San Francisco State, but and just growing up here in the Bay, it is not the same city. And I'm sure Jose can really speak to that more than I, as somebody who
I lived in the TL for a short time. Jose, I'm not from there. I'm from the East Bay, but I did live in the TL for a short time. I actually rather enjoyed it. But I'd love to hear your take on how San Francisco has changed. Jesus, even in the last 5 years, 10 years. But what's your take on San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, it has continued to change. Even before my time, things were changing. I think the speed, the rate of which it started to change was really when we saw that tech bubble, right? Twitter coming in was like the catalyst that just set it off. And things have significantly changed. I think I'm actually starting to see some people that I grew up with, that I went to high school, that had moved out, actually starting to move back. And I think that's part because people are starting to leave, like the tech bros are starting to leave, which is a good thing. That's really is a good thing. But, I can think back just 3 years ago, none of the people that I grew up lived in San Francisco. And if you look at like actual data, actual demographics of what the city's makeup looks like, you're going to find that the African-American Black population has significantly decreased over the last 10, 15 years, just significantly. We're talking 3%, at a time where the population was significantly higher, like way significantly higher. So, and then when you look at, who's sitting in jail, who's sitting in the county jail in San Francisco, 2/3 of them are people of color. Half of them are identified as Black or African American. And so, this is a city with 3 to 6%, right now. People can dispute those numbers, but that's what the, Black African-American population looks like in San Francisco. But they're overrepresented, in the county jail system. And so, that's the
largest Black population in the Bay Area.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said it's never really been the largest Black population in the Bay Area, San Francisco in general. And now it's even dwindling much, much smaller than it even was when I was growing up.
That's right. I mean, in San Francisco, if we were to talk also about Oakland, right, that is a city that has predominantly been, for the past have, more than a century been a very Black city. We have gone from seeing the city be like 65% Black, and we've lost 25% of our population. In Oakland Rising, we have always garnered about 60,000 voters in what we consider the flatlands. So if you imagine the flatlands being very industrial, and it has a history of, being working class and poor. And many of the folks who moved to Oakland or lived in Oakland, the Black population, migrated here from the South, right? Prior to World War II, and then really fueled by World War II. So much of the industry was built on that. And then also there was and so what we've seen from that in the past, even 5 years, we went from having 60,000 voter supporters, and now we're only down to like 42. And that's because who we reach out to through our work, electoral work in Oakland Rising, has diminished. Like the number of people just aren't there. And to see that significant drop by nearly 18,000 voters, that's humongous, right? And so the impact on that, I think you begin to see the politics in the city change. You see the policies, and you begin to see the neoliberal policies that continue to happen, right? So the city then begins to like, well, we need to continue pushing them out so we could bring more developers in, right? We need more development. So what do? They disinvest. They've been disinvesting in these communities for generations, but you see the disinvestment over a few decades. And, our current mayor really did a lot more damage than she did over her during her tenure, Libby Schaaf, as mayor. And we've seen the city just go into ruins. I don't know how else to say it. I grew up here in Deep East Oakland, and I've never seen the level of grime and dirt. It just is dirty. The city's dirty. The city is literally falling apart. We have huge potholes. I have had to personally change my tires every year for the past 3 years. And then not only that, but then we then increase our regressive taxes in order to fill those gaps. But then what happens is then public land in areas of the city that are working class, poor communities, the disinvestment continues to happen. Then they pour in the developers, right, to lease up and purchase, or to lease or purchase public land. And then they develop on it, and who then gets to live in those buildings is not ours. It's not our people. They can't afford to pay $3,600 for a 2-bedroom apartment. We have a 175% gluttony of at-market rate housing in Oakland right now. We have less than 25% affordable housing units, and they want to continue to build. So who can afford to live there? It's not longtime Oaklanders. It's folks who come in continuously from outside of our communities. And then we see the politics change because people don't have the heart, they don't have the connection, they don't have the culture, they don't have Oakland in their hearts, at the center of their hearts, right? So what they invest here is not the same.
This brings up a very, very, very serious conundrum, problem, issue for people who have politics. I don't want to use the left because that assumes that there's a left in the first place that's worthy of being taken seriously. Let's talk about people who care about working class and poor people. This onslaught that you're talking about in California, particularly in the Bay Area, was not done exclusively under the management of the quote unquote evil Republicans.
No,
We are often told,
that's right.
as political actors in this society, that we have to be afraid of. Much of this onslaught was done at the management municipally, on statewide level, by Democrats.
That's right.
Who will tell you that if you don't vote for us, beware of what those evil Republicans are going to do.
That's right.
What the question I have for you guys as actual organizers, actual people who your day-to-day job is about getting people to understand how to change the political will of the system to make demands on their needs. What does that process look like when there is no political will from either side to give a damn about the people you are fighting for?
I mean, I'd love to hear Jose really talk about the model that Ella Baker Center uses to organize. There's so much heart in the work that they do and the connection they do with their communities. But at Oakland Rising, we do use our, within our mission, right, is one of the things that we do is to build, we flex people power by doing electoral work. And where that comes from is our organization is a collaborative. So Ella Baker Center being one of our collaborative partners, we have 8 others who do issue-based and community-based organizing and base building. So it ranges from like Mujeres Unidas y Activas, who are working with, domestic workers, monolingual Spanish-speaking domestic workers, from East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economy to Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Caso Justa Just Cause, Ella Baker Center. I'm probably missing others. Parent Voices Oakland. There's so many. But that they came together and were like, we mobilize, we organize, we do all of these things. We go to the city council meetings, we go up and we participate in these things and asking for policies and realizing that actually what they needed was an electoral arm to the work. And so that's what Oakland Rising does. We use our electoral power and infrastructure to really push on the city to activate the type of change both inside and outside. So through our collaborative process, we're aligning our like-minded forces, but we also participate in larger coalition spaces that have really moved to, it's taken us a long time to get here. So there's the Oakland Rising part of that work where we run, the same kind of canvassing programs that electoral and candidate campaigns use. And we talk to folks about those things, but it is not our end all be all, right? Electoral work is not it, because many of us don't actually believe in the actual electoral system, like the whole representative democracy. But we know that in this moment, we need to create policies and budgets that can impact our communities and at least mitigate some of the harm that has been done for so long within the structural systems. So we see those as a vehicle to mobilizing people and organizing. So we door knock and we talk about the issues that matter to our organizations and to the base. And we talk to them at the doors. We get them to come out and vote, but we also mobilize them to be active in the city in terms of what's happening at City Hall. We also are beginning to expand that work into a broader Alameda County, which is the county which Oakland resides in, and really pushing on, the DA's office and the sheriff, as well as the Board of Supervisors. And because, and we won some really big things this fall in coalition with many other organizations through the Oakland Progressive Alliance and Refund Coalition and Defund the Police Coalition in here, that we were able to win $18 million to go to the Department of Violence Prevention. We finally saw some serious changes in it was like basically reinstituting the Cultural Affairs Division back up to levels of from 1993. We did the same for Public Works. And so that outside strategy of being able to have base building organizations that are mobilizing not only their membership, but through our electoral arm are able to reach out to, like I said, up to 48,000 voters in the flatlands, to get people to put pressure on the city to make those types of changes. Through our Oakland Rising Action, our C4 arm, then we go through a big endorsement process with all of the candidate races, as well as any ballot measures that are moving through the city. And through the work and coalition, not just Oakland Rising Action, our committee, but many other organizations and movement work here have been able to finally get, for the first time in I don't know how many decades, if any decades, we have a majority progressive vote on the city council, and not a neoliberal city council. We have Nikki Fortunato Bass, who is in District 2. She actually comes up from sweatshop workers' rights in LA, and was the executive director for East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economy, has been doing that level of economic work and building economic justice work for decades. And then Carol Fife, who comes from the Alliance for, God, I can't remember the acronym. Do you remember, Jose?
She's
California
in now, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
She's in the city council now.
She is. She's in District 3 now. And they both come, they're not politicians. They come with a community organizer background and framework, right? So they approach this is part of that inside strategy, right? Is they approach their work sitting on city council, one where they see themselves actually accountable to a base. They're not trying to win votes. They're there to really think about and push policy and advance policy and budgets that reflect the needs of the community, and in a way that we have never seen before. And so we've been able to really win these changes. And we're hoping to make that impact as we move broader into the county level, because the work that Jose does through Ella Baker Center and Decarcerate Alameda County and the Justice Reinvestment Coalition is, the sheriff's department that runs Santa Rita Jail there is horrendous. And so we can really see that the electoral politics is a way for us as a vehicle to talk to as many people as we can about the issues that matter. And then our base building organizations, volunteer through our programs. We build our volunteer base for those electoral programs, but then it's also an invitation for voters to then enter the work and the movement. And so that's part of the inside-outside strategy and building that up.
Let me ask you guys this question. Speaking of California and sheriffs, and that's an elected position. So the LA Sheriff's Department has a little bit of a gang violence problem. What is the strategy? And a lot of people are saying the opposite of Camden, New Jersey. If you guys, Pascal, do you know about Camden, New Jersey, getting rid of their police department some years ago?
I heard about something like that. I'm not well versed in the actual strategy.
It was more of a way to eliminate union labor than it was a defund the police measure. But the sheriff's department in LA historically has been pretty fucking horrible. as defund the police becomes a very popular slogan, what realistically is a solution? Because it's not going to be more training as they're trying to do in Los Angeles. Body cameras mean nothing. And this culture of gangs within the police force, it's kind of been inherent in especially LA police forces since the 40s.
So like, you know, yeah, LA sheriffs, they're pretty terrible, pretty fucking terrible. But that's not exclusive to LA sheriffs. You know, that's all of them, you know, and they've been gangsters. You know what I mean? Like they're the biggest gang in the world. Like they've been gangsters. And so, you know, I think we can trace it back as far as we want to go back, as far as like when the first colonizers came, you know, to this country, right? And they had patrols to, you know, make sure indigenous, you know, folks, you know, would stay in their place, or, you know, whatever it is that they were doing, you know. And, you know, we can go forward to all kinds of reforms, quote unquote reforms, that have tried to take place, studies that have said, okay, we need community policing, we need more studies, we need, you know, more educated police, you know. And, you know, I just scratch my head and I just say, imagine how that would sound if when the first colonizers came, the solution wasn't, you know, you're occupying land, but the solution was, well, actually, we need more indigenous people on the force. You know, that to me is absurd. It's ridiculous. And
But it sounds, think about this though. It sounds ridiculous now. And again, I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate. But if you go back and like read some of the early conversations about just having Black people on police forces, this was meant to stop kind of the needless assault on random Black people, right? Like these Black cops are going to know the good ones from the bad ones. And if Jose, if you're from the Bay, Liz, you're from the Bay, we know that a lot of cops look like us and will womp on your head just like the white boys will.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you get that pass. So that strategy really didn't work. But I to a certain degree, I kind of understand why people think that way, because you also can't look beyond the system that you're in. You're just trying to, how do I make this thing that I'm in work a little bit better?
Well, I think that sorry, Pascal, you want to?
I was going to say is that if let's do a thought experiment. If we look, we have a theme on this show. We call it the 50-year counter-revolution. The basic theme is that from the time of the assassination of Martin Luther King, 1968, up until today, the politics of America and the West in general has been a counter-revolution against most of the politics that came about and culminated in the New Deal Civil Rights Coalition of the 1960s. So we basically have had a 50-year plus reactionary politics. If we realize that part of the politics of that period of time is the neoliberalization of the American economy, basically hyper-privatization, removing government services from the people, and that also part of that has been the increased proliferation of mass incarceration to incarcerate those poor Black, brown, Latino, and even white communities, as well as an increase of brutalization by cops who are going to need to have those militarized weapons, who are going to need to have all of those powers to be able to crush more skulls of people who, in the age of increasing precarity, which is only going to get worse now because of COVID. How exactly do people who are radicals, I won't insult you guys by calling you progressives, radicals like yourselves, go create a politics when the actual social and ideological infrastructure of communities in these places with the people you care about are those folks saying, we don't want to get rid of the cops. We don't want them beating on our heads either, but we want them to protect us, like we're seeing with actual voter turnouts, like Adams in New York City, where in working class Black and brown communities, they voted for a cop who said, yeah, cops are a problem, but we need to be tough on crime. But we're seeing polling data where working class Black and brown communities who have been victimized by crime are saying, we don't want to get rid of the cops. How do we exactly take that radical rhetoric and match it with the actual demands of the communities that we at least say that we care about organizing?
You know, we went through this process last year, or earlier this year, right? So here in Oakland, you know, the Anti-Police Terror Project about 6 or 7 years ago came together and formed a campaign called Defund OPD. So it really is sort of like Oakland is one of the places where you really began to see for the first time the words defund the police, right, coming out and leading that forefront. And so big props to Anti-Police Terror Project for the work that they do. And last year, after the murder of George Floyd, we had a huge backlash by the city in terms of, you know, people coming out in the streets, and then the city's backlash to that was to institute a curfew. And so we got together and at the leadership of APTP came out into the streets and basically said to the city, fuck your curfew, right? And we had thousands of people in the street. We were surrounded by California Highway Patrol, by the National Guard, by Oakland Police Department, and several other police departments that came to help Oakland out, to stop what they said was going to be a riot. And we ended our action with line dancing, right? And really came together as a city and began to formulate the Defund the Police Coalition here. And we really pushed last summer on the city council. We had a very neoliberal city council that was like pushing really hard back on, and, you know, we had lots of folks of color on that city council that were saying, no, we can't defund the police. But let's co-opt that language around reimagining public safety, and we'll give you a little task force. So that task force came together. Nikki Fortunato Bass, she was one of the co-chairs. Another co-chair, his name is Lauren Taylor, a city council member who was like, you know, is really down for the police. He doesn't want to defund the police, right? Because he is part of that neoliberal agenda. And so it brought together over, you know, 100 volunteers who spent a few months going through a process of thinking about how do we shuffle and move funding around in the city to move 46% of the general fund budget that goes to OPD to refund to the community, and talk not only about that, but all the different types of reforms and changes that needed to be seen within the policy framework of the OPD of Oakland Police Department. So you can go to APTP's website and see those recommendations. There were a lot that we all worked together on and put that out there. And then on top of that, the folks who were kind of leading that, there was folks who were given some funds to reach out to the community and hear back from their communities what they thought about defunding the police. And so Urban Peace Movement and Oakland Rising, as a member of the Defund Coalition, we shared a similar survey that we created in terms of asking people. And Oakland Rising ran a text banking program, and we reached out to over 1,100 voters in Oakland Flatlands, and we heard back from them. And 65% of respondents said that they agree and believe that we should defund the police and refund back to the community. And I think that the question, we got a lot of pushback from people who were against this, right? Who doesn't want to defund the police, who wants to support police and keep them in our communities, that they said our framing of the question was off. But I think that that's in and of itself intrinsic to the conversation. So the city also did a survey, and they said, yes, you know, the priorities of our city says that people, like 75% of the people want OPD to be and be funded at the levels that they are at. But then when you break down the data, you actually see that it's actually the fourth priority. And so when we matched up our survey results, and we found of like 700 people that responded to our survey, and the additional 400 people that responded to Urban Peace Movement survey, the identical survey, that people were saying actually the top three priorities were jobs, addressing the violence, and housing, right? And so when we looked at the cities, same survey with the same type of questions, but framed very differently too. In fact, the top three priorities were the same, right? So policing actually wasn't what people wanted. What they really want, and when we talk to community members, you know, and we've saw a spike in Asian targeted violence here in Oakland, that what people really want at the end of the day is they want to know that they're going to go home to a safe home, that they're not going to get evicted, right? They want to know that the next day that they have enough food on their table, that they have enough, they're making enough money to buy that food, to pay for the electricity, to pay their rent so they can stay in the homes and feel safe. That actually at the end of the day is what we all want. And so when you start to talk to people about, well, what would actually keep you safe? Do police really keep you safe? And when you talk to people in the community about what do police actually do in our communities, they will all tell you, oh, they don't actually do shit. They don't show up until after. You know, we have a huge, car, not only car vandalism, but car break-ins and stolen car situation here. And we know that in Oakland, when that's happening, I'm pretty sure this is the same across the country, is that when you start seeing car windows broken, you know the economy's bad. And that shit was happening way before the pandemic was happening. Here in Oakland, we started to see car break-ins and stolen cars all over the place. So that when you talk to people about, when you go to the police, what do they do about your stolen car? They're like, they don't do shit, right? So what did you get from them? I didn't even get a report. I couldn't get a report from them even, because they won't come out. And without them coming out, they won't do anything about it. And when you start to talk about, like, what are their clearance rates for murder? What is their clearance rate for all of the things? At 46% of our general fund, and we still have a homicide rate at this point in Oakland at 90. What have the police done? We had a stabbing and a shooting in Chinatown. It's 2 blocks from OPD headquarters. Nothing. They couldn't even catch the guy. So what kind of crime is really actually being prevented with police presence? And so we went through a really huge process over the last year, and with this past budget, really led by Nikki Fortunato Bass and by Carol Fife and their budget team, to really look at the ways in which our current budget can think about the policy that is moving towards where we have a priority of shifting our funds away from OPD street beat cops who are taking care of traffic stops, right? To actually solving the crimes that they say that they're there to solve. And so I want to say all that, like, that, yes, people say that, but when you really get to talking to people at the doors or on the phones or even through texting, that in fact the conversation is a very different one.
We want to take the super chat while we have it here. What do you guys think about building strength through international ties with other radical organizations outside the USA?
Do you want to take that one, Jose? I don't mind, but
yeah, no,
I feel like
take
I've been talking a lot.
I mean, there's a lot to learn from other groups that have organized historically and currently. I mean, something that just comes to mind is September 11th just happened, and You know, folks will look at, you know, what happened in New York, but I'm talking about September 11, what happened to Chile with Salvador Allende. You know, this was, you know, a homie was socialist, you know, party, you know, and the CIA basically took him out, you know, and, you know, it created a massacre. But fast forward, I look at what's happening over in Bolivia. You know, in Bolivia, they have developed the political infrastructure. The labor movement is nowhere near like that. It's not comparable to what the labor movement is in the U.S. You know, and so they have created this infrastructure, this labor infrastructure, where they had a recent coup attempt a couple years back. But thanks to the actual like ground indigenous like communities, labor movement, they were able to push back and able to really defeat the coup attempt. And so like I would love to build more with international organizations, international groups, and really learn, you know, from them and what they've done well, how they've created that infrastructure, that political infrastructure.
Yes, and I really appreciate those examples. And the ones that I would add additionally in terms of the connection is particularly around policing, is that Oakland Police Department, as well as the Alameda County Sheriffs, went to, at the invitation of the Israeli Defense Forces, to learn the same types of tactics that they have used to suppress and to terrorize the occupation of Palestine, right? That the same terror tactics that they use there on the people of Palestine, that they were teaching to our Oakland Police Department and Alameda County Sheriffs. And that we had hosted for several years Urban Shield, right? Where we had tactical forces, not only police department, but military and, you know, those military contractors to come in and sell all of that type of military equipment, so that now we have 3 helicopters that cost us about $3 to $4 million a year. We have a Bearcat that rolls through our city and rolls up on our community members, right? We had single moms who had occupied a home, right? And they brought the Bearcat out, and they brought in military equipment, robots, to go into the house to make sure that they were safe to enter the house. These are single moms.
Wouldn't you say that image ultimately kind of won the day for the Moms for Housing?
That's right. I think, but you know what that was, though, was years of organizing, right? Yes, that image like played a role. It did show like the way in which that our police department and our cops decide that they're going to use their military might to actually come into our communities and enforce, you know, developers at the will of developers. But what that was built off of Moms for Housing, the organizing that they did for years. They didn't get to that point without 10 years of organizing.
No,
right?
the strategy, I'm impressed by the strategy.
Yeah.
Of what happened to get it that far. But and I'm just kind of throwing the question out because I don't know the right answer. Maybe you guys can help me with this. When that happened and CNN caught wind of that story, right? If the big part about that story to me was that they were targeting these homes that were owned by corporations that were laying dormant in a city where I moved last year from Wood Street, right across from the encampment, living in the warehouse I wasn't supposed to be living in. So me and all them people was living where we had no business living, right? So for them to occupy a vacant house, and that isn't the only vacant house in West Oakland in that area, brought a whole new conversation up. But I kind of want to say, unfortunately, the spectacle, as we were talking about earlier today, Pascal, on Marcus's Left Flank Vet Show, became the story. And then when something extremely similar happens around Thanksgiving in Southern California, where Caltrans has a ton of housing that they had let a few people stay in, when the weather got bad and these people tried to do the same thing out there, it didn't get the same level of media attention. It almost felt like, look, you guys got one of these where we're going to come through. And it was equally as egregious, if not more so, in Southern California.
You know, and yes, and I think that, you know, because they were leading in the forefront, right? Moms for Housing was leading the forefront in a way that nobody has really. They used a strategy that hadn't been used before, and so the police and the developers and the city, they didn't know how to respond to this, right? But they continue to build off of that momentum and really see some of that work happening here in Oakland, where we've seen people who have gone on rent strikes and, you know, entire apartment buildings being able to win some, you know, some protections around not being evicted and having some of their debt erased and all kinds of things. But just kind of going back to the international question, you know, that we see that solidarity work, that yes, we're working at the local level, but that much of our organizing really is in connection to these global movements and against some of these neoliberal policies, like economic policies that are impacting all of us, right? And so the movement of people across borders, the movement of people because of war, because of economics in other countries, like I'm in the United States, I'm sitting on a lonely land here in Oakland because of US intervention and war in Korea, right? That my family lives with 3 generations or now 4 generations of the impact of the war, the sustained and continued war in Korea. So when I'm talking about like what policing means, I'm also talking about it on a international level, but we are talking about it like in a very localized way, right? But the connections are clear because, you know, the federal government, you know, spends what? More than 50% of our federal budget on militarism across the world. So if we look in Oakland Rising's collaborative and see the multiracial organizers in the space, that every single group of people have been impacted by neoliberal economic policy and militarism in our homelands. And homelands meaning outside of this country and within our communities here. So within the borders here, as well as within the city limits and within specific communities here, that those are the same policies. And so as we think about what kind of organizing really needs to happen, that same inside-outside strategy needs to be extended to an international level.
Well, we're basically at our hour now. I want to ask you both, would you be interested in coming to our patrons only after hour session for at least a half hour? We could ask, I have the 800-pound gorilla question I want to ask is, how do you avoid?
Ask it behind a paywall.
How do you avoid? I want to tease it out. You suggested that I tease it out in the past. I want to tease it out. How do you avoid the trappings of the nonprofit industrial complex as organizers on the land?
Oh, that sound effect. That was perfect.
So I'm hoping that you guys can spend some time with us in the actual.
That's a great question. I love it.
Can you guys stick around for like 20, 30 more minutes?
I can stick around.
I see there's a bunch of little
my little people. They are very independent and have made themselves dinner, so they will be in the background eating because this is our dining area.
Oh, so you just messed everything up.
That's okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to send you guys a new link. Give me like 5 minutes. Thank you guys so much for watching the show. I do want to say tomorrow, I might be coming from this location again, but Marcus and I from the Left Flank Vets are going to be doing our first ever sports themed show. It should be interesting. I'm not going to give you too much what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be a sports themed show, of course, with a leftist perspective. That's going to be tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. And then Thursday, we're talking about the politics of yoga. It's a deeper discussion than you think.
All right.
But part of that is in the super chat or in the after hours segment, Pascal is going to downward dog for everybody.
I don't know what that even means. I'm afraid to ask, but we are going to continue with that question about the nonprofit industrial complex in the Patreon section. I want to thank you guys so much for being guests. This was a great conversation. We went through a significant amount of material, and please, hopefully, you will be willing to come back on again after the recall.
No, thank you both. Yeah, honored to be here. I'm a fan for real. Like now, I'm a fan. I really am. Y'all gonna see me in the chat. I'm like, man, that chat is lit. Like, yo, so
For real.
Yeah.
I've just been like trying to keep focused here, but watching all that chat go down.
You can't watch the chat. I try to. I should warn people. Don't watch the. Here, let me shut up. We'll talk about this off air. All right, don't hang up, you guys.